Welcome to Real Talk in ELT, a podcast that talks about the reality of teaching English. Okay, so welcome back to another episode of Real Talk in ELT. I am here with Stephanie Sue, is the last name, right?
Yes, that's correct.
Hi, welcome. We were introduced by a mutual friend that you actually took Delta with in Turkey, Walter.
Yep.
Yes. So
Yep.
First and foremost, I think we have to congratulate you on finishing Delta.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, there's still a few months left. I'm still waiting. I have to submit and then wait for the results, but fingers crossed.
Are you
I'm
doing
hopeful.
the M3 now? Is that what?
No, M2 was actually the last module. I've been working on it for the past 4 years. Yeah.
Oh, okay. So what order did you take it in?
1, 3, and now 2. Yeah.
Oh, interesting. Why did you choose? Okay, hang on. Let me introduce you. Okay, wait. Let's go back. Okay, so let me introduce you, and then I'm going to have lots of questions. So, Stephanie comes from the United States and has been working in education in Asia for over 10 years. She recently completed her Delta in Istanbul, Turkey, and has been working in academic management in Vietnam since 2018. So, officially welcome.
Yep, thank you.
Now back to that question. Why did you, is that a normal, I don't know, because everybody kind of does it differently.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it was just a matter of what was possible for me at the time, because I have been working full time. So I did modules 1 and 3 while working full time as an academic manager. And so the greater flexibility of 1 and 3, study at your own time, submit at your own pace, that worked for me while I was doing a full-time job. But then having had that experience, which I really didn't like, to be honest, I love being a full-time student, and it's very hard for me to compartmentalize.
Okay.
So my boss was kind enough to grant me a contract break so that I could finish up Module 2 on an intensive schedule, which worked out really well for me and my study and work preferences. And yeah, so I did that fast and furious, and then came back and jumped right back into work. Yeah.
No, it's interesting because I did mine. Well, I did intensive, but like the 3 modules in 8 months. Do not recommend. I do not recommend.
You hear my gasp just now. I mean, my goodness.
I know. And
Were you also working during that time?
I had 35 to 40 classes a week. So I was like, I don't know how I survived marriage and everything. It was insanity. But so I have that kind of online teaching Module 2 experience. What was it like in Turkey doing it intensive? Like I don't know, what was your experience so we can kind of compare?
Yeah, I mean, so my joke is that Turkey was my plan C for Module 2. That's how long it took me to find a provider that fit my schedule and was actually running the course at a time that I could take it. I was originally going to take it, again, intensively right here in Vietnam, actually. But I think I was one of only 2 people who had expressed interest in the course, so it was canceled.
That happens a lot. That happened it's unfortunate, but it is what it is, right? Then what was choice 2?
It was Argentina. Again, the reason was because for us here in Vietnam, what is considered winter here, December, January, February, that's the low season. So I wanted to complete it during low season so that I could be back here supporting my center during the summer months. But yeah, Argentina also didn't work out. And then I interviewed with ITI in Istanbul. The interviewer was Tom, who actually owns ITI, and he asked me the same question, and I was also just as honest because that's just how I answer questions. And then he kind of deadpan was like, so where are your backup plan? And I was just like, yeah, but then it worked out really well, So
yeah, but that's the thing. It's not the backup plan because of the quality of the course offered there. It's just because you had other criteria that took priority, right? So it's
yeah.
It is what it is.
And worked out, and it was great, and I had a fantastic time. So it was kind of like I ended up where I needed to be anyway.
Because here in Brazil, it's mostly people take the Delta, mostly like the extended courses. And now that it's offered online, it's a lot easier for people because they need to continue to work to pay it off, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, yeah.
So, how is it like in terms of scheduling of because I did my CELTA intensive years ago. I did CELTA intensively where I had like back-to-back classes every day. Is it the same for Delta?
For intensive Delta, we had one teaching practice every week across 6 weeks. So definitely doable. But actually, I realized early on that basically every waking minute was spent studying, writing the background essays, writing the lesson plan. So definitely intensive. I get that. But also very similar to my CELTA experience, which I also did intensively. And I also remembered, lots of late nights finishing up assignments, lots of nerves leading up to the lesson and things like that.
Oh, yeah. I remember I was doing it and I had a colleague friend at the time and it was like pasta party at Kelly's house and we just sat there and my husband is like, I'll see you ladies later. And he left and we just sat there and we're eating carbohydrates because it was just calming at that point. We were so stressed out. It was just like carbohydrates and lesson planning together because we had lessons almost every day or every other day, depending on the scheduling.
Yeah,
So
every other day, right?
yeah, it was like until midnight, 2 o'clock in the morning, writing the lesson plans. But then obviously Delta, you have the background essays and the lesson plans. So
Yeah, and I think I know that other kind of intensive module twos, they sometimes have unassessed lessons that they continue teaching the students outside of the lesson that they prepare the assignment for. So I can't really imagine the additional workload of planning and teaching unassessed, unobserved lessons. To kind of maybe it's part of a longer course that the students are taking and things like that. I was quite grateful that I whittled it down to one lesson per week.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, sometimes we did have like unassessed lessons at the beginning of our course so that we could kind of get to know the students a little bit, which was helpful. But I think in between teaching, I don't think I would have been able to cope with that either.
Yeah. We also had the one unassessed lesson basically on the second day of the course to get to know the students.
Birth by fire.
Yeah. I know it was fine. It was totally fine. Yeah.
Okay, so then let's go back a little bit. We jumped ahead, but I do have questions because we were chatting just right before we started recording here that you're from New Jersey.
Yeah.
How in the world did you end up in Vietnam? Like, what happened there?
Sure. Well, in college, I went to college in Pennsylvania, and I majored in English literature and educational studies. And I very vehemently avoided getting teaching certified. I had classmates who had gone the student teaching route, and I was just like, I can't do, 7:30 a.m. classes. So I got my degree. Many of my classmates went on to, get teaching jobs in the US. And I applied for a position in Shanghai, China. Education related. It was in the field of helping Chinese high school students apply to American universities in terms of helping them write their personal statements, put together their resumes, prepare for interviews, things like that.
Now I'm gonna stop you. Hang on. So I'm assuming you got that job?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I did it for 2 years.
Okay. So then how is it different, Chinese high schools to the American process? Because the American process of it is extremely different from Brazil here, where we have like one college entrance exam here in Brazil, and that's it. That's the only determiner. Is it the same?
Yeah.
What is it like there?
The Chinese university experience is very similar, it seems, to the Brazil university experience. It's that huge exam. It's called Gaokao in Chinese. Okay. And students will literally stop doing anything else in their senior year of high school to only study for it.
That's exactly how it is here. We have vestibular, and that's it. They just study for that.
So there's this kind of there was this thriving market for kind of unraveling the secrets of the US college application process. And it became the thing like many middle class families would pay to have the service. And the companies would range from basically ghost writing your essay for you, but we were a bit we didn't do that. Our students had to send in multiple drafts of their personal statements. We would send it back with comments, and they would revise it, and so on and so forth, until we felt that their essay was ready.
And how's the proficiency in general with high school students in China? Because I worked with some South Koreans here, adult South Koreans in Brazil, and they told me a lot about the educational process in terms of English language learning. And they were amazing at reading and writing, but speaking and listening, they didn't have a lot of practice with it. Is it similar?
Yeah. It's been over 10 years, and I think my brain has mostly shifted to like Vietnamese students and their strengths.
Okay, you can talk about them too.
It is similar. It is similar. I mean, because the culture is very similar. It's very exams focused. There is that big university entrance exam, so probably the same characteristics would apply. Many students are quite strong in grammar. In reading, and actually a lot of them in listening. They do a lot of listening exam practice, listening to recordings, answering comprehension questions, and then of course the productive skills is really where they lag because of a lack of opportunity to truly use language in that context. So
that's what I found too with the South Koreans. They knew a lot, like really good foundations, good repertoire of vocabulary, but then they just never had the opportunity for productive skill practice, and then it lagged behind.
Yeah, very similar. Lots of passive knowledge, but then in the moment, not really knowing how to use it at all.
Okay. Sorry. Okay. So then you were in that position 10 years ago, and then you moved. What was that? Okay, so China to Vietnam now.
After 2 years, took some time off, traveled a bit, then took a very interesting position in South Korea. My job title was called head librarian. And it was actually an English language center, but it was trying to teach English in a very creative way that I really loved. Basically, I was in charge of a program where in the first hour, students, kids between ages 6 to 11, would come to this room filled with shelves full of books. They would select a book that they wanted to read, often chapter books or picture books for the younger ones. After they finished reading it, they would choose an activity based on Bloom's taxonomy to do about the story that they'd read. And then we also had classes that revolved around reading several chapters in a book and then doing, what's her name? This Harvard professor's, I think it's like critical exploration or something like that, where they write down like 10 things that they noticed while they were reading. Nothing, no guidance at all, anything they wanted to, whatever their attention was drawn to. And then we took turns sharing them in class and just kind of going off their notices to discuss the plot, the characters, the writing, answering their questions about vocabulary if it came up, things like that. So yeah, that's why I kind of
student-centered, very interesting approach. Have you heard or do you know Dorothy Zemak?
No.
She's amazing. And she's in the States too. But she travels around and she has her own she's a publisher, a small publisher, and she does lots of like graded readers and things like that. And she has a very similar approach to that. Her position is very let them read for the joy of reading and then take what they notice or what's interesting to them and develop things based on that, not the other way around, because you can extract a lot from this. That's actually quite interesting. And
I loved it, but it's also why I say that I don't have 12 years or 10 years worth of teaching experience per se, because again, a lot of my earlier positions were like they were education, but they were teaching adjacent almost.
Okay, so that was in South Korea.
Korea,
Now,
Korea, yeah.
now did you go to Vietnam or no?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
So finally, I did my CELTA. I did it in Budapest, Hungary.
Nice.
And near the end of the course, one of my tutors was like, yeah, Steph, what's your plan next? Like, you've done China, you've done South Korea. I was like, I have no idea. Really, I wasn't planning anything. And she was like, have you thought about Vietnam? Because I just spent 4 years working there and I loved it. And I was like, no, I hadn't heard of it. I hadn't visited. But I looked into it. I interviewed with a few centers, got offered the position, decided to take it, and moved over. And with the exception of 1 year where I was doing my master's degree, I've been here in Vietnam since 2015, which kind of shows how much I love it here and also how much of home this place feels to me.
Okay, because I was going to ask you, so what's the environment like? How, because there's a lot of teachers, especially now. I've been working at what one as a CELTA tutor, and a lot of the CELTIs, they come in, they're like, I want to travel. I'm like, awesome. Get your get your teaching certificate so you can go off into the world. But a lot
Yeah.
of people then become very hesitant, we'll say, because they don't know what it's like. So when you got there, what was it like? And why did you stay? Why did you choose to stay there as opposed to maybe China or South Korea? Because you had good experiences, but
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, living in Vietnam, I mean, for me, China was like baptism by fire in terms of living abroad. I had never lived abroad before that, and it was very hard for me. I'll kind of summarize by saying that. So I kind of joked after I left China that anywhere after China would be easy, but it doesn't really mean that, being in Vietnam was easy. I actually remember my first 48 hours in the city, barely eating anything because I was too terrified to go into one of the like street food places. I didn't know the language. I didn't know what dishes to order, things like that. So the first month was quite challenging, getting places, not being a little paranoid that people were trying to scam me, trying to find a place to stay, also getting used to teaching with the expectations that my company had and stuff like that. But my kind of attitude changed once I started taking some Vietnamese lessons, and that kind of demystified some bits, the simple act of being able to order food, hear what things cost, ask for how much things cost, ask where the bathroom is. It really helped. And I started to realize that, and this is the reason why I stayed in Vietnam, is because the Vietnamese people are extraordinary. They are helpful, they're generous, they're hardworking, but at the same time, they know how to let loose and have fun. They've been through a lot, but they still are like welcoming, and they want to learn. I think that's the extraordinary thing about working with Vietnamese students is that whereas maybe in other countries or other cultures, you may have extremely silent classes of students. Once the ice is broken in a classroom with Vietnamese learners, a lot of them are just really on board with trying to use the language, asking questions when they don't know something, not not as afraid to make mistakes. Still a little bit of fear and intimidation there, but yeah, I think I stay mostly for the people, I would say.
it's funny you said that because my sister, she was living in Japan for a while and then she trekked over to Vietnam. She did Vietnam, Cambodia, and then Laos. So she kind of made
Yeah,
a loop.
yeah,
And she said that that area is the most hospitable region that she, like when she went there, she was like, it's amazing. It's amazing. Like the
yeah.
people are amazing. It's very traveler friendly. That's what she felt when she went there because she was learning, she was she had little bits of Japanese and English. That's it. She had
Right.
nothing, and she said it was very, very travel friendly, and the people were really accommodating for people like foreigners that come in.
Yeah, yeah, and I think obviously my experience here was enhanced by the fact that I had studied some Vietnamese and I could communicate a bit, but it's not that great. My Vietnamese is not that great, and communication is still difficult. A lot of foreigners here actually get by with little to no Vietnamese, but I did find that just a little bit, just enough to communicate with taxi drivers and restaurant owners, waiters, things like that, really improved my quality of life here.
Then, okay, so there's some parts of the population that obviously, because let me backtrack a little bit. Brazil is my only like international experience of teaching English, and
Mhm.
there's a lot of people here that have, they're fun. Brazilians are fun. They have this because English is taught in the schools. So the verb to be has been done for 4 years, and they're very comfortable with that. They've got the hello, how are you? I'm fine, down pat, that type of stuff. Those kind of
Yes.
those fun little basic chunks. Um, but for the most part, if you come in, someone, if you're in large cities, someone is going to know enough English to help you. So,
Yeah.
what is it like in terms of proficiency in Vietnam? Is it broad? I mean, when we go out into the countryside, obviously people have less contact with the globalized world because obviously,
Yeah.
they're in rural areas. But in major cities, do you find that the proficiency is there's something there? Because I
That's a good
see I
question.
see English everywhere. For example, I'll drive down. There's a couple stores in the city that we live in, and we live in countryside of São Paulo,
Uh-huh.
countryside, and there's some stores that have English names.
Mhm.
So it's embedded in some of the Brazilian culture that English is there. Is it similar or no?
That's a really good question. And I think to start to answer that, I would also say that there are differences between northern Vietnam and southern Vietnam. And I lived in Hanoi, in northern Vietnam, for the most part until last year when I moved down here to Ho Chi Minh City. So, what I have noticed, again, just talking about these two cities, in Hanoi, I was able to not use English when communicating with locals, when buying food, when ordering at restaurants. Um, Whereas down here, first of all, the accents of Vietnamese between the two parts of the country are so different. It's like almost two different languages. So that may play a part. But when I struggle to communicate down here, most people, from anyone from the local shop owner to the young student who's working in the cafe, knows enough English to switch to English to speak with me. And it's quite surprising. I mean, it surprised me because I was coming from Hanoi. So I would say that in Ho Chi Minh City, a decent part of the population, no matter what their age, knows just enough English to, communicate the basics. Like, you know, taxi drivers will be like looking at the app, you know, are you Stephanie? They know how to say, money, like money amounts in English. They can ask simple questions like, "What's your name? Where are you from?" Whereas in Hanoi, the portion of the local population who's able to do that is a lot less, and I think there may also be kind of geographical attitudes, less willing to use any English that they have if they can feel you have a little bit of Vietnamese. There might be also cultural and attitude differences.
Can you expand on that cultural and attitude? Like, I've never
Yeah,
been,
yeah,
so I'm super
sure.
interested. Like, what's the difference between?
So Hanoi is the political and cultural capital of Vietnam, whereas Saigon, we call it Saigon, otherwise known as Ho Chi Minh City, is like kind of the business and economic capital. So Hanoi is more kind of inward looking. They are in charge of making sure everyone feels Vietnamese, is Vietnamese, whereas Saigon is much more outward looking, and they are looking to expand their network, move into business with international companies. And so yeah, Saigon is more cosmopolitan, I would say, and Hanoi is more traditional. So that kind of attitude, I do think, filters down to the kind of people who are there, but also the kind of people, both locals and foreign, who choose to live in each of these cities.
That's really interesting. So then you said that where you are now is kind of the business center. What type of industry do you, okay, well, backtrack a little bit. I got a lot of questions. So do you work with adults, or primarily do you work with it? Like, what's your working scenario? Is it a private language school? What is that? What's that scenario? We'll start there.
Yeah, I currently work at a language center that caters to teenagers and adults, and we only teach academic English and IELTS preparation, which is actually pretty niche for a language training organization in Vietnam. Most of them veer more towards young learners, but we only do teens and adults.
Okay, so then you're doing academic prep classes with them, but then what is the major industries? Because if you're working with adults, where are they working, and what's that situation?
Let me see. Again, I don't know too much about it. I think Vietnam is like kind of taking over from China in terms of production of goods. So there's a lot of like textile industries, maybe like pharmaceutical industries, I think, are starting to gain some ground here. Many of our students are a bit more on the affluent side. So again, not sure really how their families earn money, but we also have contracts with government organizations, with banks, with companies to train their employees. So, for example, we recently started a course with bank employees, and again, many of them have a decent chunk of English already, probably pre-intermediate to intermediate level, because of the frequency with which they do business with people from other countries. So yeah, as I said, I think a lot of the most successful industries and people here in Saigon really are interacting with foreign companies.
And then what? So the teenagers, obviously, I would assume that they're doing academic prep for possibly exchange programs, things along those lines. The adults,
Yeah.
what's the incentive for them to do IELTS prep, for example? Why are they getting the certificates? Is it just a demand from the company, or is it for possible international opportunities?
This is really interesting because it has to do a bit with opportunities, but also with educational policy in Vietnam. So about 5 or so years ago, the Vietnamese government basically declared that the IELTS exam would be the primary or even the sole indicator of academic success for Vietnamese people. So basically, they had like maybe a 5-year or 10-year long plan by the end of which high school students, if they achieved a certain level on the IELTS exam, could opt out of the university entrance exam to go into universities. University students now need to have a specific IELTS band score in order to graduate and get their degree. And again, like everything is kind of trickling down from this policy. So that's kind of the huge driving factor of people studying English in Vietnam. And of course, again, our students, many of them are planning to study overseas. So they need that for visa requirements. Adult learners, again, visa requirements for work visas. I think Canada has Canada uses the IELTS for checking English proficiency.
They do, and they run on a point system. I had a student that was interested in going there for it was for immigration purposes. If you're immigrating and you're using the point system, then the higher the IELTS band, the more points that you get, and they do like a raffle lottery type of thing. So
yeah. So I don't know if schools here do the raffle system, but there's definitely that benchmark.
right.
Under a certain IELTS score, you need remedial classes, or you just can't get your degree, or you have to do that university entrance exam that is terrible and horrible, and nobody likes it.
So they're actually substituting an English proficiency test for an college entrance exam?
Yeah. Again, I don't know the nuances of
Yeah,
it.
the specifics of it, but that's an interesting twist.
Yeah.
Because it's a proficiency exam. It's not intended to be testing general knowledge. It's intended to test.
Oh yeah. I mean, this is where we get a lot of differences between what we say and versus what students come to us asking for. And again, because Vietnam, like many Asian countries, is very kind of exams focused.
Right.
So they see an exam and then they think, if I just study the exam, I will unlock the secrets to the language or whatever the subject is.
Okay.
So they come to us and they're like, I need more vocabulary about politics, or I need more vocabulary about forest conservation. And they think this is the formula to getting higher scores on IELTS. So it causes tension in our work because we know better. We know that it's a language proficiency exam, but students are coming at it like it's a subject. And so a lot of our explanations are about, okay, if this is it's an example of your proficiency. You can't really cram for it in 2 months because proficiency doesn't work like that. It's not like your biology exam where you didn't study a whole semester and then you did an all-nighters rereading your notes and you passed. So there is a lot of people who expect that they can go from elementary level to upper intermediate level on their timeline, which is often 3 months out. 3 months before their exam date, they'll come to us, be like, yeah, I need to get IELTS 7. Okay, when's your test date? 3 months from now. All right, let's do a placement test. Let's see what your entry level is. Oh boy. Yeah.
I mean, I'm not criticizing the government for their choices or what they obviously probably had their reasons and studied. I'm hoping they studied why they chose to do that. But it's putting unnecessary strain on some of the citizens because it doesn't quite align with what the test is intended to do and how it should be. It's just going to be complicated for teachers and institutions to handle that.
Yeah. I mean, I have a lot of thoughts about it, but at the same time, the IDP and BC who own the IELTS exam are benefiting from it. So they're not in a hurry to, criticize this policy. In terms of business is booming because of this policy.
Of course. Yeah, no, of course. So then where there's money, right? So then do you, well, I would say maybe does the institution that you're working at, do you try to inform? It's hard because it's just, masses of people. It's not one institution's responsibility to then educate them and say, listen, this is going to take longer than 3 months to get you from a band 3 to a band 7. It doesn't work that way. How receptive are people in receiving that type of information? No, you need maybe a course that's going to last for about a year or 2, or if not longer.
It's very tricky. I mean, we've been in Vietnam for over 20 years, and for most of that time, our focus has been on academic English. We have a curriculum partner with an Australian university, and so we basically deliver their academic English curriculum here. So
Nice.
we did that for about 15 years, and then this policy came out. And so before, students were like, I just want to get better. I want to study overseas, or I want to apply for international companies. And we were like, here's our academic English program. It'll take, this is the pathway. This is how long it'll take. Then when the policy came out, we started getting more and more students who were doing what I mentioned earlier, which is like, I have an exam in 3 months' time. Get me to my target score on my timeline. So yeah, it's been very hard. And at the same time, because this is where money is being spent now, everybody is paying for English courses to get an IELTS score. So entrepreneurs have come out with, the secret to improving one whole band score in 60 hours.
Oh, it's not just in Brazil. Okay, good. So you have the Instagrammer influencers that create their own methodologies and that will sell you a booklet that once you do the booklet, you'll pass with flying colors. You'll be fluent according to their standards. Oh, good. Okay.
Yeah. So all of
That's
a
fun.
sudden, our kind of slow and steady academic English pathway doesn't look as attractive because people are coming in there with flashy offers and promises. So it has definitely shaken up the market and changed the way we have needed to present ourselves and talk about our offerings.
Oh, it's. I think it's just happening around the world that whole the academic policies, are decided on huge higher echelon government levels, and then they start trickling down, and then they have these very bizarre effects on the actual practitioner that's in the classroom working with humans, right? And
Yeah.
trying to get them to develop. So
Yeah.
I think it's a challenge that's, going to be around for a long period of time, unfortunately. But I mean, even here in Brazil, I don't have much information about it, but there is a law, or I think it's a bill, that is supposed to be voted on in Congress, perhaps by the end. It was supposed to be last year. Now it's maybe this year, that bilingual schools, if you want to qualify as a bilingual school and call your school a bilingual school, then all of the teachers need to have proficiency certificates, international proficiency certificates of at least B2, B1 or B2. I can't remember, but I think it's like the FCE level, so I think it's B2.
Mhm.
And if that starts happening, schools are going to have teacher shortages, because it's not just English departments. It's, if you say you're a bilingual school, this is going to affect the history teacher, the science teacher, because they'll, in essence, from what I understand, which is very rudimentary of this bill, in essence, everyone needs to have that proficiency level to be able to teach in state schools.
Wow. Yeah, and because my job is academic management, so these are the these are the types of things in our fields that I have to think about a lot, because I'm involved with company strategy and policy and development. So again, I try to shield my teachers from it as much as possible. But yeah, it does change the types of courses we offer. It changes how many students we've got and a lot of things. Yeah.
Do you have, I imagine within your institution, then you have requirements of teaching credentials and proficiency, but here in Brazil, unfortunately, if you teach at a state school, like a state or federally funded school, then you need to have you need to have an education degree and a teaching license. So what they call here pedagogia and letras. That's the thing that you have to have, and you have to have the licenciatura, which is your teaching license. But in independent language schools, you don't need anything. Literally, there can be people that go to Australia for 6 months, come back from a vacation and say, hey, I want to start teaching English at this point. And they can. Is it similar in Vietnam? Or, I mean, you obviously have gone through, you've done what you're supposed to do and what we all
Yeah.
hope to achieve, but
Mhm.
Is it similar there where you can just
It is very similar.
Oh, okay.
Not quite as wild wild west as it seems in Brazil. Um, the minimum requirements, government requirements, is university degree, 120-hour TEFL certificate, and if you're from a non-native English-speaking country, which is a whole other can of worms, an English proficiency score of a certain level. So it sounds simple,
And that's
but
state school or that's across the board?
sorry, that is at kind of language training centers, language
Okay.
schools run evenings and weekends mostly.
Okay.
If you want to go into the legitimate schools, the Monday through Friday legitimate schools, the best ones, you require like a UK or US teaching license. Yeah.
So that you have to get your, so that would be meaning that you would have to have your license from like the US or UK to teach legally
Um,
in those countries to be
yeah,
able.
yeah. Like the official international schools is what they're called. The tier one international schools, you need something like a PGCE or like a state teaching license from the US to teach in them. There's also a very questionable requirement of 3 years of teaching experience outside Vietnam, which is a struggle. And you have to get documents to prove 3 years of experience outside Vietnam. Again, really, really weird. Again, someone in a room somewhere declared this, and then we all have to kind of scramble around to follow it. But
But do teachers usually, I mean, do they, is it one of those things that it's a rule, but then people don't necessarily follow, or they find like a loophole around it?
there
Or
are there are ways to get around it because, again, similar to probably what it would be like in Brazil if that policy passes. If we adhered strictly to this law, then there wouldn't be enough teachers, and the demand far outweighs the supply right now. So
yeah, I think,
and Vietnam is like a very good place to get started in teaching because of the low barriers to getting a job. But it's also very easy to stagnate, and I would say 90% of teachers here end up moving on or going back to their countries after, say, 2 years. So if you do want to stay longer, you really do need to up your credentials. And again, that's kind of why, yeah, I say, do the CELTA, do the Delta, do it properly. Just because it's easy and you can like walk down the street and people will offer you English lessons doesn't mean you should do that for an extended period of time.
that's yeah, it's interesting because and I'm not sure how the exchange rate works in Vietnam, but here the cost of CELTA and Delta are actually quite high. We have the Cert TESOL, Dip TESOL, and all of that, but it's quite high. So there's teachers with 10, 15 years experience that are taking CELTA because
Oh.
it's so expensive.
Mhm.
And what I've started to notice, and I'm green in terms of working on CELTA courses and doing, like, I've done teacher training besides that, but official courses like that, I'm very 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 new. But
Mhm.
what I'm starting to notice is that there's a lot of teachers in ELT here that, like you said, there was low barriers. They entered into it and then stagnated for a while but I think in a different way, not on purpose, but because here the exchange rate is so high to be able to do those types of programs that it's essentially inaccessible at most points. So
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I also have lots of thoughts about the dominance of CELTA in terms of what constitutes a quality TEFL program. But yeah, I mean, again, there's that conflict. Like, of course, you need to set a standard so that your fee paying students can receive a certain level of education that they deserve. But at the same time, um, especially there's a big difference here between the salaries that local Vietnamese teachers earn and foreign English teachers earn. As
Oh,
the difference is very staggering. It's like
is it just because of native, non-native speaker?
it is due to cost of living and the fact that for the longest time, prices and salaries in Vietnam have been very low and still are actually. So that's again, that goes back to like why Vietnam is such a popular spot for traveling, which is that it's very easy for a newly graduated university student from, say, Australia or the UK to take, $1,000 and make that stretch for a month here. Whereas here in Vietnam, $1,000 would be 5 times the minimum monthly salary for a local worker. And Vietnamese teachers here aren't paid very high either. So there's also
But
tension between very experienced Vietnamese teachers versus these kind of newly qualified foreign English teachers who come in and get paid 5 times more than locals who have been teaching for 10 or 20 years.
what's the justification for that? Is it just because, for example, are they in positions that I don't know, like the Vietnamese teachers that have been working, they're in institutions that no longer have growth opportunities, and that's the salary, and that's it, and they can't move over, like even if it's a parallel or horizontal move, they can't move over, or is it because there's a higher value of foreign teachers?
Higher value of foreign teachers,
Well, that's
definitely,
unfortunate.
especially native speakers. And
Mm.
then if you can't get a native speakers, especially white speakers. So there is this
Oh
kind of,
God. Okay.
we could go down there if you
Okay.
want. Um, but yeah, there's this kind of assumption that to study English well, you need to study it with a foreigner because that's their native tongue. And that has been really good for business, for language centers,
Hmm.
and companies that send foreign teachers into public schools for that like once a week English lesson with the foreigner.
Okay.
Um, but also there are pedagogical differences. A lot of the Vietnamese English teachers, they often, they come through local universities, like they do their bachelor's and their master's in education in local Vietnamese universities. And again, the focus is a lot on transmitting knowledge of grammar versus
Oh.
usage and application of English. Yeah.
Okay. So possible reskilling of the more traditional university programs could potentially boost this difference, or eliminate the difference, I should say, between the Vietnamese teachers and the native speakers.
There's, there's that, but there's also the need to stop making all tests only about grammar. So there's that assessment
Mm,
side, and there's also the reskilling side. Yeah.
yeah. Well, I mean, and that happens here too. I mean, I have a friend here, Helen. She's doing her Delta too. I'll connect you. She's fun. Helen Haga, and she gets on rants and raves about non-native and native speakers, and I try to champion behind her as much as possible. She's a quick lady, but it happens here too. It still happens
Mhm.
here, and it's not. It's a little bit of the institutions. I will blame the institutions because they do still, unfortunately, have those job postings that say preference of a native speaker, or they have those, those ridiculous restrictions. But unfortunately, the schools use it to their advantage when they can, but mostly it's because of the demand from the market, that Brazilians in general prefer to study with native speakers. They
Mhm.
have no justification for this. They don't have. I have many people that will send me messages, and I'll ask them. I'm like, "Did you have a bad experience? Did something happen?" No, no. And they've reached proficiency levels that are, B1, B2, C1 with non-native speakers, and then they say, "But I need to study with a native speaker," and I just I don't understand why behind it. And so sometimes I ask them and they don't really have a justification, but in their head, for whatever reason, but it's
Yeah.
mostly driven by the market here, the students.
It's the same thing here, and sometimes, I mean, I would say probably a previous company I worked for, there were issues with like one of our Vietnamese ethnicity teacher, like literally grew up not in Vietnam, but is ethnically Vietnamese and has a Vietnamese name. And then parents coming to the center and being like, we paid for a foreign teacher, so why are you using a Vietnamese teacher to teach my child English? So yeah, I get it. It's coming from the market, but at the same time, I kind of strongly feel that it doesn't mean we can just be like kind of wash our hands of it. Like
Oh,
we need to
no,
take.
no. Yeah, I'm not advocating like cow down to the market and just, okay, no, this is what we do. No, but I usually try and ask and try to understand why. If there's a reason, I mean, I worked in business before I moved to Brazil. So because I have that experience of working in huge corporations and things like that, I typically teach business English students. Why? Because I
Yes.
have a little bit of background. So it makes sense that they would look for me. One, I'm a
Mhm.
qualified teacher and like you, I've tried really hard to like keep up with all of my, credentialing and things like that and my training. But then at the same time, I also have this unique aspect just about me. And it's not because I'm native, it's just because I happened to work in business. So I try to, tease that out of some of why they want it, but at the same time, it's pervasive and it's hard to,
Yeah.
again, educate the masses. It's not something that
Yeah.
is a singular teacher, I think, can approach that. Well,
Yeah.
that's too bad. That's really unfortunate to hear. Hopefully the in general it's moving in a different direction, that to kind of close that gap. And
We'll see. I mean, I I'm proud. I'm happy to say that my organization, we pay our Vietnamese and our foreign English teachers equally,
good. So
which isn't true across all organizations. So we fight really hard for our Vietnamese English teacher. They need to have the same standards and qualifications as our foreign teachers,
sure.
and because they have worked hard, they deserve to be recognized and treated equally.
Absolutely. They
Yeah.
have the same requirements, they've done the same work, they deserve the same pay. That's yeah.
Mhm. Mhm.
Hopefully more organizations will be more like yours. But I don't want to take too much of your time, but I do want to ask you any final tips or things that you would like to leave for the audience, even if it's about training or if it's about possibly getting into the market in Vietnam and how that would.
Yeah, I mean, I'll talk about like getting started teaching in Vietnam, because again, I'm really passionate about it. People who are looking to start teaching English, Vietnam's a fantastic place. Just that balance between work and cost of living and the exciting things that the country has to offer. So I guess my tip would be research really, really well. Don't trust everything you read or everything that people say to you. Go with an organization, especially for new teachers, go with an organization that will be above board in terms of legally sponsoring you to work in Vietnam. Oh my goodness, like the number of people who think it's okay to do monthly visa runs and work here on tourist visas. No, 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 no. Like, don't put yourself in that position where you could be deported. If you really want to, establish the start of a teaching career in Vietnam, there are organizations, and in terms of the number that they'll offer you, the teaching rate they'll offer you, it may not be as high as you want, but there's a reason for that. They will provide professional development. They will provide HR support, help you find accommodation. Some will even pay for Vietnamese lessons. So consider all of that added value before making a decision. And then once here, just take advantage of all of that, enjoy it, and then also really think about, like, don't stagnate. don't expect like that whatever qualification you did 3 years ago will continue giving you salary raises, because it will max out. So you don't want to get to that position, because cost of living is going up. More and more people are coming into the market. They have the same qualifications as you, so you need to show like you're dedicated, and you are aware, and you're thinking about what the next step is.
I think that's an amazing tip. And don't forget also, with all of the benefits that the money really does stretch there, according to you, with the cost of living, it's nice. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I want to thank you so much. You're welcome back anytime if you want to, if you do anything fun and you want to share with the audience anytime you want, you're welcome back. And I think that's it for us today.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you so much, Kelly. This was really fun.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Real Talk and ELT. Want to join the conversation? Head on over to Instagram at Kelly Cuttington ELT and send me a message. Be sure to subscribe to my YouTube or Spotify channel to stay up to date, and of course, take care of yourself, your health, your vibe, and your tribe. Until next time.